Hey everybody, this is the second episode of Dissecting History, the Reagan Era, the War on Drugs. It's a very informative and juicy episode, so I want to get straight into it. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and comment, and subscribe. Thanks.
Here we go.
If there ever was a politician white conservative Republicans prayed to and salivated for, it was Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan will always go down as one of America's most influential presidents. His approval ratings are still one of the highest. He did a lot to this country, but to put it plainly, Ronald Reagan was not fucking with the black community at all. And that's to put it plainly. Ronald Reagan was a wealthy, racist, white man. And if you were in that club in the 80s, you were winning. Pretty much, Ronald Reagan ran the numbers up for his set. I mean, this man gave us mandatory minimums, CIA Contras, Reaganomics that deserves a whole nother video, on average longer prison sentences, an introduction to mass incarceration, and the crack cocaine sentencing disparity of 100 to 1.
Fuck Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan really did a lot to this country. But before we can even talk about Ronald Reagan and his nefarious actions, we have to talk and speak on his predecessor, Richard Nixon, because it was Richard Nixon who created and declared the war on drugs in 1971. The war on drugs was pretty much a facade. The surface level objective was to slow down drug use and to halt the counterculture created in the 60s. Also, the crime rate and the murder rate was extremely high in the 70s. But the real reason why the war on drugs existed was informed to us by top-level policy advisor John L. Rickman. He later informed the world on what the war on drugs was really about. The Nixon campaign in the White House had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by setting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders and raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did.
What the fuck?
So what was created in the 70s under Nixon was maximized in the 80s under Reagan. And boy, was he effective. When Reagan came into office in 1980, the prison population was around 329,000. When he left, it was 627,000. This is pretty much a 100% increase, or double the amount of people in prison within 10 years. The 80s was crazy. A lot of people were getting locked up.
I love the game. I love the hustle, man.
The 80s was a crazy time. It would seem as if in 10 years, everybody who was outside got locked up. And pretty much, yeah, that's kind of exactly what happened. How? The Reagan administration used the media to really sensationalize crack use.
Today, there's a drug and alcohol abuse epidemic in this country, and no one is safe from it. Not you, not me, and certainly not our children, because this epidemic has their names written on it.
Really, nigga?
But before they did this, they heightened public fear of drug use. How? Well, starting in about 1981, Nancy Reagan created this brilliant campaign of Just Say No to Drugs, which spawned the most hilarious commercials known to man.
Hey, little dude, send your mama and daddy out of the room. I gotta get you up on this. You know who I am, Snake, dude.
Sarah? Sarah?
She won't answer you. Or she can't.
Why not?
This is the way it's been since she started smoking pot. Can I take your order?
Man, I don't have any money.
All right, go.
Man, what? It's not the easiest thing to do.
The media promoted and ran with so many stories about crack use. From crack babies to how addictive crack is, the media could not get enough of crack.
A pregnant woman smokes crack cocaine. Her intense high lasts only a few seconds, but it can leave her unborn child with a lifetime of trouble.
The babies were born damaged, and now it appears they may be damaged for life. The government says caring for them could eventually cost $20 billion a year.
These children are not normal in the sense that they're going to be able to enter the classic schoolroom and function in large groups of children.
What the fuck?
I mean, it's as if you're being attacked by someone with chemical warfare.
So pretty much the Reagan administration and the media swelled public fear of the new emerging drug of crack. They sensationalized stories about how addictive crack is, to making up stories about crack babies. Right, crack babies. The American Civil Liberties Union did a study over 20 years and determined that a baby born addicted to crack is no different than a baby born addicted to heroin or alcohol or any other substance. So there's truly no real reason to distinguish a baby born on crack than from a baby born on another type of drug, addicted to another type of drug.
Dr. Claire Coles was reaching a different, though equally startling, conclusion about crack babies based on her study of infant behavior at Emory University.
The effects didn't seem consistent with the action of the drug itself. Many of the children who were the so-called classic cocaine babies were premature babies. And the symptoms that were seen on the videos, on television, the tremoring arms and all that, that was prematurity. You could have taken any premature baby and gotten the same image. I think that people got very focused on cocaine is the cause of this rather than thinking substance abuse is the cause of this, maternal lifestyle is the cause of this, social issues are the cause of this.
And basically the Reagan administration couldn't get enough of the public fear associated with drug use, but more specifically crack cocaine. But everything came to a head in 1986 with the accidental death of NBA prospect Len Bias. Len Bias died from cardiac arrhythmia 2 days after being drafted by the Boston Celtics with a second overall draft pick. His cause of death was an accidental crack overdose. False. Len Bias did not die from an accidental crack overdose. The media reported that Bias died from a crack overdose. Reports later surfaced that Bias died from a combination of alcohol and cocaine use, not an accidental crack overdose.
Really makes you think.
So the media misrepresented the truth and blew a story out of proportion by associating it with crack cocaine. This accidental death and the resulting fear from it was all the Reagan administration needed to create the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986. This bill allocated $1.7 billion to help fight the war on drugs. But what resulted was mandatory minimums, on average longer prison sentences, and the worst part, the crack cocaine sentencing disparity of 100 to 1.
In 1986, Congress passed a sprawling criminal justice bill, a central feature of which was a mandatory sentencing disparity punishing crack violations much more harshly than those for powder cocaine.
That don't make sense. And here's the thing about that. There was no type of justifiable evidence or data to reflect this crime bill, this 100 to 1 disparity. It was completely illogical. The American Civil Liberties Union concluded there is no rational medical or penological reason for the 100 to 1 disparity between crack and powder cocaine, and instead it causes an unjustified racial disparity in our penal system.
These effects have prompted critics to decry excessive crack minimums as purely the products of Reagan-era white supremacy. Reagan-era white supremacy. Reagan-era white supremacy.
After the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, mass incarceration really began to pick up steam. The effects were immediate. In almost every state, arrest rates rose. And in almost every state, black males were disproportionately arrested more than anyone else in the country. The 2008 article, Targeting Blacks, Drug Law Enforcement and Race in the United States, published by the website humanrightswatch.org, reflected the difference in rates in prison admission for drug offenses by race. The table reflects how black males outpaced their white counterparts in drug offenses in 34 states. Black women too. African American women incarceration rates for all crimes largely driven by drug convictions increased by 800% from 1986, compared to an increase of 400% for women of all races for the same period. Overall, blacks were sent to state prison for drug offenses in 2003 at 10.1 times the rate of whites. In the state with the highest disparity, Wisconsin, blacks entered prison on drug charges at 42.4 times the rate of whites.
But wait! There's more!
The American Civil Liberties Union published in October 2006 the article, 20 Years of the Unjust Federal Crack Cocaine Law. Their research concluded in 1986, before the enactment of federal mandatory minimum sentencing for crack cocaine offenses, the average federal drug sentence for African Americans was 11% higher than for whites. 4 years later, the average federal drug sentence for African Americans was 49% higher. This analysis also reflected that law enforcement targeted inner cities and black communities long after the crack epidemic in the 80s. In 2003, whites constituted 7.8% and African Americans constituted more than 80% of the defendants sentenced under the harsh federal crack cocaine laws, despite the fact that more than 66% of the crack cocaine users in the United States were white or Hispanic. The discriminatory drug laws of the 80s only opened up the door for more malicious crime laws like the 1994 Crime Bill. Now, what makes the 1994 Crime Bill so messed up is that it had incentives for states who adopted tougher laws to build more prisons. So money was influencing policy and not, I don't know, facts.
We spent and keep spending billions of dollars on incarceration and enforcement instead of prevention.
The 1994 Crime Bill had underlying incentive programs that provided states with funding to build or expand correctional facilities and jails. These programs provided $12.5 billion in grants to fund incarceration for states that adopted tough truth in sentencing laws. Truth in sentencing laws were laws that made prisoners serve 85% of their time and eliminated disciplinary credits, good time, and correction centers for certain offenders and requires offenders to serve their entire minimum sentence in prison prior to being considered for parole.
We only started experimenting with this idea of taking away hope and taking away incentive within the last 20 to 30 years. And frankly, it hadn't worked.
The federal government essentially subsidized states across the country to build more prisons.
These politicians, Democrats and Republicans, literally supported cuts to welfare and social services while building more prisons as a response to poverty and disinvestment in communities of color.
After 1994, the number of state and federal adult correctional facilities rose 43% from 1990 to 2005. So on top of discriminatory drug laws that set up a racial disparity in our prison systems, black people still have to deal with over-policing and discrimination. Case in point, the notorious and unconstitutional stop and frisk policy. The website sentencingproject.org published a report in 2013 that reflected the results of New York's notorious stop and frisk policy. They found that black and Hispanics make up 25% and 29% of the population respectively in New York City. However, between 2010 and 2012, 52% of those stopped by the NYPD during stop and frisk were black, and 32% were Hispanic. White New Yorkers are 44% of the city's population, but only 9% of those stopped were white. On top of all of that, the Vera Institute of Justice conducted their own study titled Coming of Age with Stop and Frisk: Experiences, Perceptions, and Public Safety Implications. 44% of the young people surveyed indicated they had been stopped repeatedly, 9 times or more. Less than a third, 29%, reported ever being informed of the reason for a stop. 71% of young people surveyed reported being frisked at least once, and 64% said they had been searched. 45% reported encountering an officer who threatened them, and 46% said they had experienced physical force at the hands of an officer. 25% said they were involved in a stop in which the officer displayed his or her weapon. By 2013, the prison population in America had swelled to over 2.3 million people. That's a lot of people locked up all in one time.
The war on drugs exploded the U.S. prison population disproportionately, locking away black and Latinos. Our prison population grew more than 900%. When the war on drugs began in 1971, our prison population was 200,000. Today it is over 2 million.